my name is Rachel, and today I'm going to be doing a book review. Now, this is a goal of mine this year to do more book reviews so that I can improve my book reviews. I feel like I love books and I talk about them all the time, but I think my straight up book reviews could use some finesse and some improvement. So be gentle, but please leave any recommendations you have down below that I could better improve my book talks and what you like to see in your book reviews. So with that in mind, I think I'm going to try to do at least one book review a month. So I already decided to jump in and do this one because I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And that is The Family Romanov by Candace Fleming. And this is about the family Romanov. This was the last Russian imperial family. Nicholas was the last Tsar of Russia before Vladimir Lenin took over, and it was no longer a monarchy set up. Now, this book is one we read for book club, and I really enjoyed it, like I said. So the basic plot is very much, well, I shouldn't say very much known, but a lot of people know the plot of this book already. So I told my students, if you do know this plot already, it's a lot like the Titanic. Even though you know what happens in the end, it's still really exciting to see how they get there. And I think that's true for this. This is a nonfiction book, so it is based on real life people. And if you don't know what happens to the Romanov family, this might be a little bit of a spoiler video. So just keep that in mind. But a lot of people, like I said, just like with the Titanic, already know what happened to the family. And basically this book covers the time span from when Tsar Nicholas II was first promoted to being the Tsar to the end of his tsardom. I won't tell you exactly what happens to the family, but they do want to get this whole family out of power. The country of Russia has decided they no longer want a monarchy. They want to be more in charge of their government because a lot of the Russian people were suffering. They saw this royal family living very lavishly, and they were all working extremely long hours, extremely hard for very minimal wages, and most of them were still starving. They did not have enough income to live, even though they were working pretty much the entirety of their lives. They didn't have weekends off. They didn't have luxury in the evenings. They didn't have time to do these things. They were working 24/7 and barely making it. So one thing that I really did like about this book is that it is a narrative nonfiction, which means it's told more in a story perspective instead of just straight out facts. So we're following along in a very storied format as we follow Tsar Nicholas II's first days as a Tsar to his last days as a Tsar. And we get to follow how the family develops, how he meets his wife, who is a relative of Queen Victoria, and how they establish their family. As you can probably see from the cover, these are all their children. They only ended up with one son, and we see the struggle with that because back in those days, which, by the way, this all takes place around the beginning of World War I and during World War I. They did finally have a son, and back in these days, any female heirs would not inherit the throne. So none of these daughters could take on his throne. He had to have a son. And when they finally did have a son, which was a struggle anyway, he was actually really sickly, and there was a lot of times when they didn't think he was going to make it. We have a lot of interesting characters that are thrown in here. One of them is one of the young daughters, Anastasia. She is the basis of a lot of myths, a lot of myths circulated that she is still alive somehow and escaped the family's fate. And it actually spawned the cartoons about Anastasia, the Disney cartoons. But all of this, again, is realistic. So you're hearing the real life story, and it takes you even up to present day when they're finding remains of this lavish time frame and some of the bones of the family buried in present day Russia. Another thing I liked about it is you get the full story of Rasputin, which I feel like I knew the name, but I would not have been able to explain who he was. Rasputin was more of kind of a spiritual, I always want to say like shaman, maybe. He gave off this very mystical vibe, and Nicholas's wife very much believed that he had these powers and that keeping him around would keep their son safe. So they keep Rasputin very, very close, even though there's a lot of hints that perhaps he's not all he says he is. Maybe he's a con man. A lot of people in the circle of the family really did not like how much influence Rasputin had on the royal family. Overall, I thought this was fantastic. I liked the narrative aspect, and there were several times where we got a break in the action of the royal family, and we got to see the perspective of peasants, of the common people in Russia. So it was very interesting to see the dichotomy of how the royal family lived versus how the normal, typical Russian family would live. There's also a breakdown in the book of, like, percentage-wise, where everybody would fall, and it's very much reminiscent of, like, the 1% idea that was very popular in the United States recently, about 1% of the population owns like 98% of the wealth. I mean, it's an insane amount of money that this small group of people owns, and that is the case in this area of Russia. Another thing I really liked is that it is around the time of World War I, which I feel like is not super prevalent in books. I mean, you can probably easily think of at least 3 books right now off the top of your head that happened during World War II, but World War I is a little bit different. I know there's some out there, but I just don't feel like they're as prevalent. So I really, really liked that. I just liked the narration. I think the narrative element, especially with Candace Lemon's writing, made it easy to see from all of the perspectives. You can see the motivations of all of the characters, even ones that you don't necessarily agree with their actions. You can see why they're doing what they're doing, even if it isn't a good thing to be doing. So I very, very much liked that element, because you could see, for instance, Tsar Nicholas, he made a lot of bad mistakes, but you could see why he did it, and you could sympathize even though he made these awful decisions. His nickname, by the way, ended up being Bloody Nicholas, so you know he made a lot of very bad mistakes. But you could kind of empathize with him and see where those motivations came from. The same thing with his wife, the same thing with the people who did not want this royal family in power anymore. You could understand all of the aspects, I felt like, because of the narrative narration, because it really gave you a backstory and a setting to see where they're coming from and why they're doing the things they're doing. Overall, I thought this was fantastic. If you have any interest in Russian history, or if you just want to pick up a new narrative book, I highly recommend this. I think it is fantastic. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars and would definitely recommend it if you're looking for a nonfiction book. So thank you so much for watching my review. Hopefully I will be back soon with a new one. Again, my goal is to do at least one a month, hopefully more, and hopefully they get better as we go along. So thank you. I will see you again in another video soon. Bye for now.